introduce them once again, starting just from my right, Jean-Baptiste Kempf, that is from Videolan. He had an amazing speech this morning in the other room. Thank you for being here. And then Jordan Maris from Open Source Initiative. Thank you. And Valerie Aurora that opened this track this morning. And thank you for being here on this stage again. The topic of this speech is quite ambitious, I think, because the title we have given to this conversation is Building Inclusive Futures. So the topic is about how we can foster innovation through policy, through software, through openness and collaboration, of course, merging together different points of view on the same topic, different experiences, different geographic looks on the topic. So I would start with one first series of questions, actually with the same question for each of you, that is, if we are building the recipe for this future we want to build, which are the ingredients? So I will ask to give one or two for each of you, the ingredients to build this more inclusive future. Which are the main aspects to focus on?
This is a very difficult question, to be honest, but for me, one of the important parts is to be always open to the future, meaning like what I see and what I see also here is that like we tend to not be able with the open source community to have more young, right? In many communities, everyone is basically aging almost linearly. And one of the things I'm trying to do always is to go and see what the younger generation needs. And it's really weird because they have like very different ways of accessing software, right? A lot of them just use apps, and there is a new thing, right, called AI, which has a lot of bad issues. But it's quite interesting because a lot of people who have never done software are actually doing software, right? Creating a website, of course, is going to be a bad one, but takes 5 minutes, right? And everyone can do that. And this is important because, like, the future is not us. The future is after us, right? And it's quite difficult, especially after you're 30, right? 35 maybe, to always like rewire your brain about that. And there are some fundamental changes, mostly because of more power or easier to build things. And of course, all of those are based on open source, but to be able to like apprehend the future, do robotics, do AI, and it's difficult because it means that we need to change our mindset, and most of us have difficulty doing that.
Thank you. You said how difficult it is at the moment to talk about the future, and we are dealing with a particularly complex evolution of AI that is really week after week.
Well, we see many things, right? There is a lot of geopolitical changes with acceleration. We see a ton of innovation that is not from the Western world, which is also a big change, right? If you look in the Middle East or in Asia, right, they are now the innovative powerhouses, and we see that with robots, we see that with now automatic cars. This is a change, right? For many reasons that I'm not sure it's the right time to discuss, right? But neither the US nor the Europes are the driving factor for innovation anymore. The fact that AI, which is just like very large number of crunching statistics things, right? Nothing else, allows to crunch very large statistics things, and we have a ton of things, meaning the web. So it's easier to rebuild what we've been doing. And most of the tech industry is just like new SaaS startups and nothing that is a very big change, right? And here we arrive where we have AI, which is changing a lot of how we interact with software, how we create software. We have robotics, which is actually existing now. It's not just in a few labs, right? You actually have robots happening. And you have access to everyone. Everyone can do software. It wasn't the case. And at the same time, everyone has a phone, right? Everyone has internet. So we arrive at all the same things at the same time. And so there is a big change, and us old people are trying to be sure that we're able, and for me it's difficult to be sure that well, let's not react and say, well, this is shit because this is for young people and TikTok is bad, which is a bit of a caricature of people, but it's important and it's a problem of change of mind. The regulations afterwards, especially in my opinion, the over-regulations, is just a symptoms of that difficulty to change the mindset.
Okay, okay, that's very clear. Lots of topics and things going ahead all together. Jordan.
I'm glad we talked about over-regulation because that gives me the perfect opportunity to say that the ingredient that I think is needed is actually laws. And I mean, I'm a policy guy, so of course I'm going to say that. But I wanted to just to illustrate this, to rewind back a couple of years to the first law that I worked on when I was in the European Parliament. It was the Digital Markets Act. And the Digital Markets Act is essentially a law which stops big tech companies from gatekeeping their platforms. So it's the law that's resulted in having alternate app stores on iOS and on Android, making those app stores more accessible on Android. But it also does a bunch of other things on a bunch of other platforms. Similarly, the Digital Services Act, which is a law about online moderation and ensuring that online moderation is fair, in particular, because these online platforms have become very powerful. And these two laws are vital for inclusion. And in my view, you know, a lot of people say that regulation harms innovation. I think it can also be an extremely positive thing for innovation. And I think that laws like these can drive innovation as well. But the thing that we started running into, this is more towards the end, was that actually the big tech companies are no longer playing along. They are doing everything they can to avoid complying with these laws, you know. And we're talking like, you know, X, the social media platform, where Elon Musk said to a European commissioner that he should take a step back and look himself in the face. There, you know, we've got, I don't like to mention names, but one particular big tech company who makes phones, who is slow walking compliance with the Digital Markets Act. So we've kind of reached this point where these tech giants are so big that they're getting to the stage where they're like, well, maybe we don't have to comply with the law. You know, maybe we can just bend this to our will. And I think that's actually probably one of the biggest threats that we face in community building in the future, in being able to build software and control and use your own devices. And I feel like the only way to deal with this is to make sure that there aren't a handful of companies who feel like they're above the law. And until we can fix that, I think that is probably the biggest barrier and the biggest risk for building inclusive futures. And I mean, you've seen it as well, sorry, that last point, with the fact that, for example, there are judges on the International Criminal Court who lost access to their emails. And open source is the solution to that. The solutions that the International Criminal Court are now deploying are open source solutions. Free and open source software solutions, sorry. And so yeah, like we need to keep this in mind, but also we need to consider, okay, well, the ICC might be the first. What happens when it's another organization, perhaps your government, perhaps a vital public service that we need to be able to access? And this is why I think laws have a massive role to play in ensuring these inclusive futures.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for you, but first of all, let's give to Valerie her point of view.
So I completely agree with Jordan on regulation done right is a path to innovation and inclusivity in our future here. I lived in Silicon Valley for 20 years. I worked for a lot of the big companies, Sun and IBM, and I watched firsthand as we went from that beautiful time period of trying to convince people that open source was even a good idea to the point that the majority of most software is open source. And I also watched the evolution of big tech going from, we'll make money somehow to, we will make money by, thank you, Cory Doctorow, and shitifying our products. Once you're locked in, we'll just charge all the money in the world. That's not innovation. When people are locked in, you don't have innovation. My particular take on building an inclusive future is informed by my background in advocating for women in open source software. And that one of the major issues is that when you say, the way that open source software will work is there will be a significant contribution from people working for free. This requires people who have free time and enough money that they're not spending that free time on another job. This is much fairer as well for people. The distribution of free time is not fair across a number of different qualities, including gender and race, right? So I fully support projects like the Public Code Foundation, trying to change, again, regulation done right, government procurement policies to change them to say that, hey, if you're spending public money on software, or on software development especially, that the result of that should be publicly available, right? I think that's brilliant. I think that's genius. I think that would be a massive support to innovation in Europe. It would be fantastic.
So public money for public result. And I would ask to every one of you, actually, how can all of this be a cultural topic that reaches a broader audience? So I guess that here at FSFCon, we more or less agree on many of the topics we are discussing about, but how can we reach a broader public and make this conversation a public conversation? Do you have an idea?
I
Any
do.
suggestion?
I think we just wait until Donald Trump figures out that he can just order U.S. tech companies to punish countries he doesn't like. That's just going to happen, and then everyone will really care. The ICC email is just the beginning. When you take away social media from young people, was it Nepal? Yeah. They overthrow the government. So if you want to learn more about this concept, look up crisis engineering.
So I think along a very similar line to what you've said, I'm already noticing this happening. People are starting to pay attention, and not necessarily for the reasons you might expect. So you mentioned Trump. And one thing that I've noticed is there's this very sort of nascent bi-European movement, mostly for supermarkets and stuff like that. But when we get to the online world, these people start to scratch their heads. They're like, well, what should I use? You know, that there might not be a European alternative. And then the idea of free and open source software comes into play, because it's like, well, it's not owned by anyone. There's no risk that it's going to be enshittified, or at least not to the degree that current proprietary solutions are, and it can be completely under my control. And I think we're also seeing the same thing with, for instance, the Fediverse. So I have lots of friends who are, for example, very pro-Palestinian and who've seen their content on social media censored. And also, interesting side fact, the Digital Services Act, which is about censorship, they found that the vast majority of censorship requests were not sent by governments. They were done by the platforms themselves of their own free will. And so, you know, I'm seeing a lot of people in my circles say, well, actually, these platforms aren't letting me speak my opinion, so I'm going to move to Mastodon. I'm going to move to PixelFed. And so I think that a big part of it is as a reaction to the situation that we're finding ourselves in, where, for one of our close allies is no longer such an ally, but for two, these companies who we have taken for granted as not doing evil things, whose services we've relied on for a very long time, are starting to become unreliable. And free and open source software is a solution to that problem.
Thank you very much. Jean-Baptiste, do you have any
Yeah, I have
comments?
a very different view, right? Like very often I said that I'm very happy that people use VLC and they don't know it's open source. They use VLC because it's useful, because it works, and then they realize it's open source, right? And like, I got so many fights with people from the open source community saying, hey, no, you need first to have something that you use it because it's open source. No, this doesn't exist in real life, in the real world, outside of the geek circles, right? I do a lot of conferences in places like south of Africa, in Middle East, or in places in Asia, right? And not usually at conferences in Europe, where people have no idea, right? Open source is a very weird and very complex topic, and they don't get it, right? So if you want to bring people, you need to have something that actually works. And I think that's one of the reasons American large companies are great is because they are amazingly good at product, which is something globally Europeans suck at, whether it's open source or not open source, right? In tech, it's very important that if you want to get people to leave horrible social network places to go to other ones, the best way is not regulation, the best way is to give a good alternative. Because else, well, you know, why would I do that, right? Because it's a ton of of small taxation on your brain, and you're not going to do it.
Okay.
So I think that the most important is to do good products open in the right way.
Okay, so being open is not enough. It's necessary to have something that actually works in the everyday life. I would like to ask something to Jordan, because when we were preparing this discussion, you raised an interesting point, I think, that is the balancing between the sovereignty, that is the title of this track, with, on the other hand, isolation, because being too into sovereignty may cause isolation in a world in which technology is global by itself. So how do you think we can balance these two needs? And after that, I would like to have a comment from all the speakers.
So when it comes to this issue, you know, I have lots of conversations with lawmakers, and they all more or less go the same way. Question one is, has Microsoft put a backdoor in Windows? I usually say, well, you know, I couldn't tell you, but it's very possible, and they could do it at any time, and you wouldn't know the better. Then the balance issue starts to come up, and my first approach is, well, you know, if you want to be certain that the software that you're using is safe, that you're in control of it, then you should use free and open source software, because you know for a fact that you can read the code, check for yourself. If the developer goes haywire, you can fork the code and maintain your own copy. You know, you have complete control and complete freedom. And then, of course, the next sentence is, okay, but, you know, how can we be sure that that code is European? Like, what's this, you know, could we have a European open source? And I'm like, well, the whole benefit of open source is that you can benefit from the work and from the effort of people all over the world, and everyone can benefit from what you do as well, right? And so this is like, I think the problem as well is, for lawmakers at least, they're stuck in this mindset of the last century. And in this century, that mindset no longer works. But I always try to explain that, well, you know, this is your best option for having that sort of digital sovereignty, and it's the only option that allows you both to have digital sovereignty and to benefit from the expertise of people all over the world, right? Without having to necessarily go and trust every individual person. And that, I think, is the core benefit. So the answer to your question is, free and open source software is the way you can balance the two, right? And I feel like that is becoming a more and more compelling argument. And I agree with what you said, that, you know, being open source alone is not good enough. It's not good enough. You have to have a product which people want to use. You have to build something that people want to use. But I think more and more, there are a lot of open source products, there are a lot of open source software tools which are good enough, but which public administrations, individuals, haven't yet discovered, and this new situation that we're finding ourselves in is meaning that they're discovering it at a much higher rate than they used to. And so I think now that the benefits are becoming more visible, but you're 100% right that we need to build these products to a degree that people are going to want to use them, and people are going to feel happy to move away from what they're currently using.
Valerie, do you agree too? I see you.
Unfortunately, I agree. I know that Jean-Baptiste would rather we fought more, but to me, it's about money, right? People have to pay rent, and they don't have the free time to work on open source software and do that final polish, fit, and finish in most cases. Like VLC is awesome, and it totally does work in many, many, many more cases than commercial software. When I look at independence and isolation, what is more isolated than 3 giant tech companies who don't let you see anything they do, right? Like, and I agree with Jordan that it is like a last century mindset of really focusing on this sort of national thing. I do have to say I really admire the French government, and I would love to hear your opinions on this, the French government's efforts to create an open source government software suite, right? That they are in control of, but is still free and open source software, and other organizations could also adapt it. But they really needed to do a bunch of that polish, and they paid money to do it. This is a thing we've always had to fight with free and open source software. The idea that it is or could be just people doing it in their spare time. I remember trying to explain over and over again that I got paid to write open source software back in the old days. So to me, especially coming from Silicon Valley and seeing the gigantic pile of zero interest rate era money that went in to develop these beautiful polished tools that fix all the little bugs, we need to have a way to fund software here. And I do think that that is involved. It has to take government action. Without it, we end up with 5 giant tech companies. I also firmly 100% believe that companies should not allowed to get bigger than a certain size, and people should not, they need to stop at like, I don't know, $500 million.
Thank you very much.
So I do a lot of. So I'm also CTO of a cloud service provider in France called Scaleway, right? And I do a lot of talks about AI and sovereignty, right? And this often comes about because a lot of politics starts asking the question is. About a cloud provider, is it possible, and so on. The answer is yes, it's possible. The answer is yes, it needs a lot of money. Building a true cloud provider is around $1 billion investment or euros, and same if you want to do a collaborative suite, right? This is the minimum. And so far, no one has ever managed to get that money, right? We found a lot of initiatives, and of course, all of them are too small to get the right size. But what I usually say is that if you want to have a good sovereignty for Europe or for other countries, you need 2 things. You need to have accessible source, right? I'm not talking about open source for good reasons, right? Is that you need to be able to inspect and really inspect everything you're deploying. And at the same time, you need to have hardware that you can access to, right? And it's way more difficult to have access to open hardware. So you don't need, in order to obtain sovereignty, you need, which means that you need to be in autonomy, right, and controlling on your actions. You don't need to own everything on the stack, and maybe that could even be, you don't need open source on everything, but you need to have several vendors, right? And for example, for Scaleway, we're very on open OCP, right? Open Computing Project. And one of the things is that you're sure that when you buy something from Supermicro, from Lenovo, from Gigabyte, from Dell, and HP, they're all the same way. And so you can change from one to another. And that's very important, is that the solution is either diversity of supplier or maintaining your access to your whole source code. And of course, having access to the whole source code is either when it's open source. But if you just talk about sovereignty, open source is an answer, it's not a necessity. It's the answer to the fact that you need to maintain, to have control over the software and enough hardware provider that you can switch.
For doing innovation and building an inclusive future, of course, it's important to find a correct way to deal with the big tech companies. You all were mentioning them during your replies. But I would like to stress more on this point. So we cannot talk without including them into our discussion. We must find a way to deal with them in a proper way. I would start with you, Valerie. I'm just looking towards you. Do you have any advice for how to deal with them? From a European perspective or a global perspective?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to get ready for the crisis in which people say, "Oh, we can't do this anymore," right? I think that...
when is it?
I know. Well, that's the thing. If
it's a year, 2 years, more?
Yeah, I think it's... So it sort of depends on the whim of a narcissist with ADHD, so I don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but it feels closer and closer, especially with the, there's a giant AI bubble and it is going to pop, and then bad things are going to happen in the US, and then there's going to be the need to distract people. I don't know. I think it's sooner. It doesn't matter. We just need to get ready.
Yeah, but do we need to be ready in a year or 2, right? It's different.
I hear you, and I thought the AI bubble would be over already, so we will see. But the point is that you can get ready, and you don't have to know when it happens in order to be ready. I hate to say it, but I would say one of the biggest issues right now is that totalitarian countries are extremely aware of the fact that the internet provides a direct access to people's brains at a subconscious level, and they are using it. This is where the troll farms are. And countries that are liberal democracies and believe in freedom of speech and all that sort of stuff are not picking up on this. I don't know what the ultimate solution is. I don't think you can just firewall things off. I think that governments need to think harder about understanding who is shaping the opinions of their citizens and what they can do about that. I don't have solutions. I just know that that's a huge, thing that governments are not seeing right now.
Thank you. Jordan?
So for me, there are two things. Number one, reduce dependencies. We cannot be dependent on these companies for things, and I say it every time I meet with lawmakers. If Microsoft locks you out, you will be crippled for months. And we're starting to see, I obviously can't reveal too many details, but we're at least starting to see people saying, okay, let's prepare a plan B just in case. We're not going to deploy it at scale, but let's have something that we can rely on if we get locked out of Microsoft Teams, if we get locked out of Outlook. And so that's a step in the right direction. And the second thing that I think is really important is enforce the laws without fear. You talked about the issue of bots and disinformation. If I go on Twitter, I'm going to call it Twitter. If I go on Twitter, almost half of the content I see is coming from bots. Almost half. And that should not be the case. These platforms, and these are disinformation campaigns. There is absolutely no doubt about it. These platforms need to be dealing with that, and if they're not, then there is an enormous problem because we have laws which require them to deal with it, and we need to enforce those laws. Same for the Digital Markets Act. Apple, I'm going to say the name, are dragging their feet. And that needs to stop. And, I have nothing against Apple. They're a great software company. They build amazing products. But a law is a law. And no matter how big you are, it should apply to you. And so our institutions need to apply these laws without that fear, and no matter the consequences.
Thank you, Jordan. Jean-Baptiste, do you have any comment?
For me, the two best strengths the Americans have is they know how to build products, and it doesn't necessarily need to be that many, but you need to care a lot, and perfection is one of the key things. And the second thing is they have massive amount of money, and if you go in most of the FANG companies, right, what you see is Indians, Chinese, French, and Eastern Europe as developers, right? And you see Americans on the financial side, on the product side. It's like obvious, right? So there is no reasons why we can't do it, but we need to to inject massive amount of money on several, let's call it heroes, champions, a few companies, right? While today we do something everyone does their own things on their way, and we spread a bit of money everywhere, hoping something will happen. This doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in China. It doesn't exist in the US. There is no reasons why it exists, right? So in my opinion, there needs to be a lot more investment. But most of the time, right, the people that I've seen over there, they're not geniuses, right? They just have a lot of money and they work hard. So it's doable.
Can I just quickly come back to one point? The Americans, up until very recently, they've been building very good products. But I'm sorry, there are ads in the start menu on Windows now. Apple have just done a UI refresh, which makes it impossible to read some of the text on your phone. Google search now recommends, if you're feeling depressed, that you jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm sorry, but the quality of their product is actually declining. Mm-hmm. And I think that I think there's an opportunity here, and I agree that we actually need to focus some of this. The blanket approach, while important, and while it is important, and it's allowed some projects to sort of come up to the surface, Mastodon being one that was funded by European money, which was sprinkled very widely over a lot of very cool open source projects. But we need money at scale. I also think, I'm sorry, I don't want to go on a rant, but we need capital markets which can raise the money that we need to turn open source projects into products that can replace the things that we currently depend on from elsewhere. Anyway, sorry about that.
This is right the point. I would like to stimulate you for the maybe last round of this roundtable that is about money. On one side, how to reach money to make this future possible. You are describing, maybe you've just told us something about that, but on the other hand, which is the cost, mainly the social cost of not having an inclusive software structure? Valerie, would you start?
Yeah, so what I love about the idea of public code, that if the government is paying money for software, that the software produced should be public, is that it's twofold, right? First, you're creating this independent, sovereign set of software that's specialized for various European governments. Two, it's taking money away from tech giants, right? There's a huge amount of money flowing out of Europe to America. And I agree that because of the end of this era of basically free money that could be spent on making a product indefinitely better without figuring out how you're going to make money, we've hit the end of that, and all of these big tech companies are engaging in making their products terrible, right? So yeah, I think that's a fantastic source of money, and it fits in with how Europe knows how to do things right now. But I agree with Jordan. Capital markets need to be reformed as well. So.
Thank you, Valerie. Jordan, would you like to
I'll take this opportunity to say one thing. We should have a European sovereign tech fund. So for those of you who know the German sovereign tech... Oh?
It just got announced.
Oh, it's been...
2 or 3 days ago.
Really?
Yeah,
okay, there is a European sovereign tech fund. Wow, great. I love it when this happens.
Let's tell us something about that.
Oh, no, I just saw they just announced it like 3 days ago. It's not like happening, but it exists as a name in a project at least, so yeah.
Okay.
So that's just what we need. You know, I really, really strongly believe that if as nations, and I'm talking on a political level now, we are reliant on some open source software, we should be funding the development of that software, and the developers should be benefiting from that funding. And I think that the Germans at the German Sovereign Tech Fund have done an excellent job of this, and it should be scaled up to a European level where there's more funds available and where we can have a bigger impact.
Thank you.
I've done the exercise of like how much does it cost to do something closer to Google Docs, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked about that with La Suite Numérique and so on, right? But like people don't understand it's missing a zero usually, right? It's not 100 million that needs to be invested. It's $1 billion to have something that is a base. Same for a cloud provider. And I'm not even talking about buying hardware, right? And I know that very well, right? Building a correct cloud provider is $1 billion investment in software costs, right? So the amounts are huge. They are not huge compared to the money, which is around 245 billion that we send to American cloud providers per year. But that means that everyone needs to think about it, right? Like, and a lot of big German and big French company, when you see the amount of money they're saying just to one provider, AWS, it's ridiculous, right? They could take 10% or 20% and reinject it in the economy, and that would be useful. And that's important is that it doesn't just need to be public money. It also needs that the European large company start realizing that, well, maybe 20% of the IT could go to like smaller things, open source, small cloud providers and so on, right? Because like, oh yeah, but we are big, we are L'Oreal, we are SAP, we need very 99.9999% of our uptime. Bullshit. Like half of the IT is a website, an internal website, by the way, where the two part of the two different business units can download and exchange files to each other, right? And half of the IT companies are building anyway website for professionals so that they can then download their invoices for EDF or other things like that. Like it's not true that most of the software that is built is not critical, even for them, right? And they need to have a bit of social responsibility to reinvest the money inside Europe, to reinject places where we have a bit more ethics than the American giants.